All right, beauties. Well, again, my name is Onel Starkey. I'm the founder of the Beautiful Cervix Project. And so glad that you've joined us today. I want to just kind of dive right in somebody from Uruguay, sorry. Yay, welcome. And introduce Dr. Jenny Martin, who is a sexuality educator and a doctor of psychology. And every time I talk to her, I learn something new. She is full of information and wisdom, and I love that, you know, she has a very scientific, evidence-based way that she looks at information, but also she is very embodied and holds the spiritual and emotional realms as well. And so I love that balance. And, you know, she has lived her own transformation in this work. And I really appreciate that authenticity. And I hope that you do too. So Dr. Jenny Martin, if you could just turn on your screen, she is going to give a little presentation today that is like a slideshow. And while she's going, if there's questions that you all have, in the bottom of your screen, there is a Q&A, which is different than the chat. And so put a question in there if something comes up, and at the end, we will have time for some questions. So without further ado, Dr. Jenny Martin, I'm so happy you're here. Welcome again. And I'm just going to turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Onel, and nice to meet everybody here. It's wonderful to be here. And it's great what you're doing, Onel, helping people really understand their cervix, feel empowered by their cervix. And I really honor you for all the work that you're doing and being a pioneer in this whole thing. It's really awesome. So now, I just want to start off with this thought that somebody said to me, and that is, my gosh, Jenny, there is so much going on in the world. To focus your time on studying cervical orgasms and sexual pleasure, like, how can you even think that that's even something that we should be? Isn't that selfish? So I thought that was an interesting thought, and it made me think about this a little bit more. So I want to start off by talking about the bigger picture, because there's a lot of fear going on in the world, right? There's people talking about we're at the end of the world. There's people talking about how we're going to merge us with machines, transhumanism. There is so much going on in the world. And at the same time, as well as all of those dire predictions and all of that really dark dystopian future, I notice that there's something else going on. And I wonder if you notice it too. And that is people seeking more for their own truth, people seeking more for the wisdom of the sacred, the wisdom of the body, people looking for a spiritual connection, and however you define that, but people seeking meaning beyond just the material, beyond just this. And the uncertainty that is all around us is rooted in just having a material focus. And so the positive side of this, and why we look at the cervix, is I truly believe that accessing cervical pleasure is a portal to accessing the divine. And I don't say that with any particular spiritual tradition, any particular background, I'm not a Tantra teacher, I honor that, but I'm just talking about in general. And in general, I do believe there's a long lineage of ancient female wisdom tradition that talks about the body, and I think specifically the cervix, being a portal to spiritual awakening. And that is really what excites me. Sure, having more pleasure, having more intimate connection with your partner, and really even being able to access these states on your own is so important. All of that is great. The pleasure, the ecstasy, the passion is wonderful, but can it be in service of something greater? And the whole idea of selfishness is about, okay, me, I want the pleasure for me. But then there's that concept of bodhisattva, right? That concept that when you attain this heightened state, it's not just for you. If we had a whole world of people who are walking around knowing who they were, that they weren't this disempowered person, they weren't this person cut off from a greater sense in the world, they could tap in at will to meaning, to unconditional love, to something greater than just their physical, I think the world would be transformed overnight. And that's what drives me. There is a lot of information and awareness that women's sexuality has been a very disempowering part of their life. I completely understand that. I've had that experience myself. But I also know your past doesn't need to define you. It doesn't. That can be a catalyst. And even if you haven't had an unwanted sexual experience, you can experience the full potential of your sexuality, which I believe can give you access to heightened states of consciousness, regardless of what your background is, regardless of what diagnosis you've been given. This is available to every person with a cervix. And that to me is exciting, because the more uncertainty is out there, the more fear is out there, it causes us to seek something beyond this ever-changing world, right? It causes us to look at what is constant, what is something that is not changing, and that is the mystical, right? So that is why it's not selfish. Okay, so let's get started on the real content that you came here for. Thank you for letting me just air that for the beginning. So now let's go back in time. Let's put this in some real world context, ground in your body, like ground this whole concept into your body for a second. And let's remember a time when you were no bigger than a blueberry. Okay, there was a time when each of us were no bigger than a blueberry. When we were in our mother's womb, this is about what we looked like at day 49. And two things happened at day 49 that are kind of cool. One is that your reproductive organs started forming, and the other is your pineal gland. It showed up on the same day as your sex organs. Like, what's with that? Why did those two things show up on the same day? Is there some connection with that? And it's at 7 weeks, which is also a very sacred number in a lot of, traditions and so forth. So is there some sacred connection between your sexuality beyond just fertility? I do believe that. Is there some connection between your sexuality as a woman, particularly, we're all women, we're all people with cervixes here, and your pineal gland? Now, let's just talk about your pineal gland for just a little minute, okay? So this is what I just said. I'm not saying I have the definitive answer here. I'm just inviting some curiosity. Could there be some pathway to enlightened states of awareness through the body? Okay. Now, not to go really off the subject here, but I need to just define my term, okay? I am not coming from any spiritual tradition. I'm accepting of all spiritual traditions. I invite and welcome all. But let's just break this down. What am I talking about? When I'm talking about enlightenment, I'm talking about accessing wisdom, love, energy from your divine self. Everybody has that regardless of what tradition they come from. Living in the awareness that you are a spiritual being having a spiritual being having a human experience. Enlightenment in this context, I'm saying, has to do with not being stuck in life's dramas, feeling emotions, not denying your emotions, feeling your emotions, but not being trapped by them, not being trapped in the fear, not being trapped in the anger, allowing it to move through you, but not being stuck in it, right? Your heart is full and open, not that you're a doormat, you just let anything happen. You just love everyone regardless of how they treat you. No, your heart is open and full, and you are able to see through what's going on. And so you don't feel like you need someone else to love you. You don't feel lack, right? You welcome a partner, but you don't need the partner because love is sourced from the divine. Okay, I'm not saying we all live like this. I'm saying this is like the possibility that we can live from, right? And the other thing to know, it's not like, oh, you become enlightened and you're all done. No, this whole concept is not a destination, it's a journey. And I believe that we are living in one of the most exciting times on the planet. I do believe if you are living at this time, I believe your soul chose to live here at this time. I absolutely believe that, because when there is such a crisis, when there are so many things converging together, so many pressures at us at once, it spawns the birth of something new. It spawns a new consciousness on earth. And I do believe the path forward is a respect of the feminine in a way that has never been really in modern times. I do believe in ancient times it was, but a respect of the feminine, an honoring of the sacredness of the feminine's energy and body, and an enlightened, a different consciousness about human sexuality. I do believe that that's part and parcel of us moving forward. And for us to be able to, each of us to be able to embody that, we don't have to preach at anyone. We don't have to convert anyone to anything. All we have to do is embody this, live this, be this, and that will be, as they say, the change, you be the change, right? This is how we change the world, I do believe. So in that way, making yourself happy, giving yourself the pleasure, it does have an important ripple effect in the world. Okay, so let's go from there. So we mentioned the pineal gland, and I'll just say another little few things about it here. So the pineal gland is right in the center of your brain. It is in many traditions associated with, actually way back east, ancient Egypt, associated with the concept of being, you have two eyes here, but there's another eye, a third eye in the middle of your brain. And the ability to see into other dimensions, science is now proving this literally. And there is a connection between your cervix, your heart, and your brain, your pineal gland, that can actually wake up this third eye capability. And, it's called the third eye, not just symbolically. There's actually photoreceptors, the same that are in your physical eye here, in your brain, in the pineal gland. There's photoreceptors, and those kick in when you're in an altered state of consciousness. So when people do one of the most potent psychedelic substances that's out there, which I'll talk about in a second, when they do the psychedelic drug called dimethyltryptamine, DMT, which was used in sacred ceremonies with shamans in ancient times. It's the part of the ayahuasca brew. DMT is part of the ayahuasca brew, if you've ever heard of that. And people go on visionary experiences in their mind, right? And they see realities that feel like even more real than here. What's happening is their pineal gland is being activated through the use of their drug. Now, did you know that the pineal gland also manufactures this DMT too? The pineal gland, as well as the lungs and other parts of the brain, manufacture this very potent psychedelic substance, DMT, naturally, without any external, anything external. You don't have to take the drug. You can take it, but you don't have to, because it's manufactured in your body. And when that substance, it increases to psychedelic levels in your body, it awakens the capacity to see into other dimensions. Now that sounds very woo-woo. I completely understand. But when I'm talking about seeing in other dimensions, I can overwhelm overwhelm you with science, which I won't right now, and give you scientific papers, that when I say other dimensions, I'm not just speaking theoretically, I'm actually I'm speaking in terms of scientific research. And my curiosity has brought me to academia and has brought me to looking at in post-doctorate studies, has brought me to look at, okay, how do these things all work out? How does this all connect with a woman's body? I know that there's ancient wisdom that says this, but how does this scientifically connect to the woman's body and to the human body? And that has been my passion and my curiosity, to be able to teach that to women in a way that it's grounded in a scientific research-based reality. Okay, so dimethyltryptamine is a molecule that occurs naturally in plants and naturally in the human body. And it is a psychedelic substance that's produced in your pineal gland as well as the lungs. And the first researcher that really worked on studying and understanding this molecule at the University of New Mexico, he was so amazed that there's nothing like this particular substance to produce mystical experiences, that he called it the spirit molecule. He said, this is, if we were to take, in fact, he looked at the Hebrew Bible and looked at some of the prophets in ancient times, and he looked at the visionary experiences they described, and he looked at what people who have done DMT talk about, and he is suggesting that these prophets of old, it was waking up their pineal gland and experiencing their own DMT connection that gave them this prophetic nature. So he wrote a whole book on DMT and the Hebrew Bible. So it's manufactured in the human body. And Rick Strausman, who was the original researcher in this country on DMT, he hypothesized that it is produced only under special circumstances, the psychedelic level in our body. And that is when we're coming through the vaginal canal, not during a C-section birth, but during a vaginal birth, there is the release of DMT. One reason is DMT also has, it has an anti-inflammatory effect, but it also has a neuroprotective effect. So the baby coming through doesn't die of oxygen, but it gives you that experience of being in between worlds, right? You're part in the physical realm and part in the material realm. And isn't that what I would surmise what birth is like? And then death, the moments before death, when, I don't know if you've ever heard of Steve Jobs. Before he died, when he was on his deathbed, the last person that heard him speak, it's like he saw something in the room and he said, oh my God, oh my God. And he just had this sense of awe. Well, this is what people talk about when they have a DMT experience, is there's a sense of awe and wonder that there's this mystical reality that is all around us, but we can't see with these eyes, we can see with our pineal gland. And by the way, the pineal gland is not made from the same brain tissue as the rest of your brain. It's actually formed in utero from the roof of your mouth. And all of your brain has two hemispheres. The pineal gland is the only part of your brain that is not, it's not split into two hemispheres. It's tiny and it's in the middle of your brain. So the concept that it represents non-dual consciousness actually has some physical basis for it. There's no right and left pineal gland. It's one little thing in the middle of your brain, and everything else is paired right and left. So, so birth and death, and the other part is possibly sex. Now, not sex in the way that porn has sex demonstrated, not the typical way that sex is shown in Hollywood movies, a different type of sex that in terms of scientific terms, it has to entrain the brain to a trance state. The sexual activity has to entrain the brain into a trance state. And the cervical, accessing the cervix and the cervical pleasure is key to that. And I'll make that more clear as we go through this. Okay, so if you look at what's called a trip report, when people do psychedelics, they take the actual drug from the plant. That's why we call it plant medicine. Here's some of the kinds of things they talk about. I felt at one with the universe, this idea of unitive consciousness. I had a feeling of being outside of time, beyond past and future. My sense of self dissolved away. That's called ego dissolution, right? Temporarily, not like you lose your identity permanently, right? Feeling that you experience something profound, sacred, and holy, regardless of the spiritual orientation. And by the way, let me just say this. There was research done at London Imperial College in the UK, and they had a bunch of people come in and do DMT. And these people were self-avowed atheists. And after doing DMT, they were asked if they were still atheists. And 3/4 of the people said they were no longer sure they were an atheist because it was unmistakable. They experienced something beyond themselves where they felt a presence of unconditional love. They felt that they were in the presence of something like entities, where you call them, angels or whatever you want to call them. They felt like there was a presence of something that was real. So overcome with otherworldly joy, unconditional love, and we've already said that last one. Okay, so interestingly enough, I am using the same words on this slide. No, I'm just going to be honest with you. These are the same words. You know why? It happens to be when you talk to women who have had cervical orgasms. I've been teaching this class for quite some time. We're helping people to reawaken this potential within them. That, by the way, is within every one of us. It's just that our cultural conditioning, lots of different things have kind of disconnected us from this potential. But when women talk about what it's like to have a cervical orgasm, they talk about the very same things as when you see people who have taken the drug DMT. Now, I don't have any research from a university to show you that says endogenous DMT, endogenous meaning innate to us, as opposed to the drug, right? Endogenous DMT is activated during a cervical orgasm. I don't have any research to show you on that because it doesn't exist. I was going to partner with the University of Michigan to do the first ever research on endogenous dimethyltryptamine and cervical orgasms. But after talking to the research team for a while, we realized there's no feasible way to do it that wouldn't be very invasive. In other words, you have to drill into your brain. So they can do it on mice, but I doing it on mice is not going to give us the same kind of understanding as if we do it on humans. So right now, we do not have the testing equipment to study this, but I've been personally dialoguing with the researchers on this. And as soon as the testing instruments are available, that will be the cutting edge of understanding spiritual awakening in the human body. Right. I don't know if you guys have looked at what's happening in psychedelics right now, but there's a lot of the FDA has approved a lot of studies. There's been a lot of funding going to universities to understand how psychedelics can rewire the brain to get people out of alcohol addiction, to get people out of opioid addiction, to get people out of chronic depression, to overcome post-traumatic stress disorder. And the same mechanism that psychedelics does to rewire the brain is the same mechanism that happens when we activate DMT on our own. It's the same mechanism. So it can have a very profound effect. And by the way, DMT and psychedelics are not addictive. They work on the serotonin receptors in the brain, not the dopamine. The dopamine are addictive. So this whole process of activating the DMT within our body naturally, or even externally with the drug, it's not something that you'd be stuck in an addictive cycle of. But my excitement is, I love what they're doing with the psychedelics to help people overcome severe problems. But I am far more excited about the fact that, that saying, teach a person to fish rather than give them, the fish, right? So teach the person that they have this power within themselves, which I do believe ancient traditions knew. I do believe when sex was practiced as a sacred ceremony in the past, women knew this. Women knew that you could activate this state. Okay, so in I can't remember the exact date, but in Rutgers University, two scientists, Beverly Whipple and Barry Komisarek, they did some research with people that had their spinal cords severed, and these people were able to experience quite profound orgasms. And it was through working with the cervix. And what they discovered is the cervix has a very unique pleasure pathway to the brain. It is activated through the main part of the parasympathetic nervous system. So that's why it's such a profound mind-body connection, because this vagus nerve that connects to the cervix is basically the nerve that connects the mind and body, that sends, like if you ever say, if you've ever heard that, trust your gut, you feel something in your gut before you even register it in your head. That is the vagus nerve that is connecting that wisdom that you feel in your gut to your brain. That vagus nerve also connects the wisdom in your cervix to your brain. The vagus nerve is the mind-body connection. When we talk about that, that's how that shows up. So Beverly Whipple, one of these original researchers about cervical orgasm that discovered this potential, she has stated that a cervical orgasm feels like it starts in the pelvis, spreads up through your heart, and then engulfs the whole body. You feel like you're floating, your mind is gone. And this differs from other kinds of orgasms we experience. For example, the momentary lightning bolt of a clitoral orgasm, for instance. And by the way, let me just mention something. It's not like you have a cervical orgasm and you just forget about your clitoris or having any pleasure in your vaginal area. It's all, when you're really having the depth of a cervical orgasm, all of that is connected. There is activation in the clitoris and the vaginal area as well, because it's all connected, and you can't just, I'm going to stimulate the cervix and forget about those other areas and the G-spot and everything. Like, it's all connected. But the cervix has its own requirements to be really activated. And it also, it's almost like having all of these instruments in a symphony, right? And you're the you're orchestrating this or whatever. As you bring in the different instruments, you have a fuller sound, right? So you can bring in just the clitoris and have that type of pleasure. Then you can have the vaginal pleasure as well, the G-spot. But when you bring in the cervix too, that adds to like a crescendo, like a much more intense, powerful pleasure that you would have otherwise. So let's talk about this really practically. So there's a bunch of main nerve pathways that go from our sexual organs to our brain. That's what I mean by genital brain connection. And this is about a woman's body. So let's start in the upper left, and we're talking about the uterus here. So what connects to the uterus? The main nerve pathways that connect to the uterus to the brain are the hypogastric and the vagus. The vagus being this main nerve pathway of the parasympathetic nervous system. And then the clitoris. Yes, it has like 8,000 nerve endings, all of that, but the main pathway that all of that information travels up to the brain on is the pudendal nerve. So that's the main pathway that travels from the clitoris to the brain. And the vagina. So the main highway of communication between nerve pathway between the vagina and the brain is pelvic nerve. Okay. Now, if you see the cervix over here at the bottom left, there's 3 different bullet points there. That tells you is there's more major superhighway of information and sensation that's traveling from your cervix up to your brain. There's the pelvic, there's the hypogastric, and then there's the vagus. So that means there is more potential for whatever sensation is going on in that cervix for it to be up here. And as soon as it's up in your brain, then you perceive it and then you experience it. It has to get to your brain for you even to know what's happening, right? For you to experience it fully. And this is why when we talk about, so when cervical orgasms are so mind-blowing, really a lot of it's due to the fact that there is a hardwired cervix brain connection that is uniquely powerful in the human body. So the researchers have spent a lot of time trying to find a similar vagus pathway, because the vagus nerve is such a powerful mind-body connector. They've tried to find that in the male body, and they have not found that. There's no sexual organ. Yes, major organs connect to the vagus nerve, your heart, your, lungs, all major organs connect to the vagus nerve, but we're talking about sexual pleasure and we're talking about sexual organs. And there aren't any sexual organs in the male body that connect to the vagus nerve. And that's a huge difference. For instance, when we're talking about a woman takes longer to, really feel connected in terms of sexual pleasure and feeling, getting into the whole experience, that's because the mind and the psyche plays so much more of a role in female sexual pleasure than male. And you could say that this has a lot to do with the fact that this vagus nerve needs to be activated. So one of the things to know about the vagus nerve is that if you've ever felt numb in your body, if you've ever felt like you can't feel anything, you feel completely disconnected, shut down, well, the vagus nerve is responsible for something called the freeze response. The freeze response is the shutdown response to threat. So if your body senses a threat, it can either go flight, like checking out, like, wanting to flee the situation, or it can fight. So it wants to attack or, confront, or it can go freeze, which means you don't fight back. It's in the animal kingdom. This is when an animal will play dead. This same vagus pathway is taking over in that play dead response. If it feels like it's going to get attacked, it'll pretend like it's dead until the predator leaves. Well, for instance, during a rape situation, it's not uncommon. In fact, it's very typical for a woman not to have the flight or fright, but have the shutdown. And that is not that you're weak or you let it happen or you're to blame or anything like that. In fact, what we know about the vagus nerve is that 80% of the communication between the brain and body through the vagus nerve is coming from the body to the brain instead of the brain to the body. That means the body is in charge of the situation at hand, not the brain. The brain isn't command central telling the body what to do. So what I mean by that is, you sense a threat, you sense danger, that there's somebody coming at you and it's unwanted sexual situation. You're not sitting here in your head, is this not safe? What should I do? No, you're immediately, your vagus nerve connection, your parasympathetic nerve system will shut you down and you just don't feel anything. And it's almost like your arms and legs are paralyzed, your throat is paralyzed because your vagus nerve innervates your throat. You can't speak. You feel like you're completely disempowered, right? And what happens sometimes is that later on, when women look back at that situation, they'll say, why didn't I say something? Why didn't I fight? Why didn't I do something? Well, they didn't make the conscious decision. Their body made it for them, right? Their body made it for them. And it was the vagus nerve that was active, okay? So there is so I talked about that in terms of what can happen in unwanted sex, but what I want to share with you here is, if we have this really powerful connection between our mind and body in women's bodies, we can activate that to access really heightened states of consciousness. If we get the body in the right state, it opens the mind in a very powerful, empowering way. So the cervix, heart, and brain are linked. The vagus nerve links all of them. No other sexual organ in the human body is connected to the vagus nerve. And let me just say this other thing. You can have sex with someone and not care about them, right? I mean, let's be realistic, right? Not have any feelings towards them, be really feeling, no sense of love or care in your body at all. But there's something different about the cervix. Since the vagus nerve innervates, this main nerve goes to the heart and to the brain. If you're not feeling open-hearted towards yourself, towards your partner, if your heart isn't open at that moment, you're not going to experience the depth of pleasure and orgasm of your cervix. There is an oxytocin pathway, which is activated too by this sense of trust and love that is in your body as a prerequisite for this experience. So your cervix does require something more of us, right? Not coming from a moralistic standpoint, just coming from basically how your brain and body are hardwired for this, okay? So the cervical heart-brain connection. As we mentioned, the cervix connects to a woman's heart, brain, and body. And I'm going to talk about this little medical symbol there in a minute here. What I want to suggest to you is, I know you see this symbol, the caduceus, all the time in terms of medicine. If you Google it, you're going to see, oh, this is the staff of Hermes. I get it. I'm not going to try to get into that whole philosophical discussion or debate right now. All I'm going to say is, we are in a patriarchal culture. A lot of the information on the internet is filtered through a male-oriented worldview. If you spend a lot of time in university libraries like I have, and you look for the obscure feminist scholarship, you're going to find that a lot of these symbols related to ancient goddess cultures and related to times when the feminine was held as sacred. And we've forgotten that. It's been kind of erased from our collective memory. I do believe that memory still exists within our bodies, though, and we can activate that memory that exists within our bodies. So there's lots of ways you can look at this symbol from a spiritual standpoint, and there's Eastern traditions that look at this symbol too. In fact, for a long time in our history, this medical symbol was seen as a very holy, sacred symbol. And I'm going to suggest to you, well, first of all, these coiling snakes up the staff, that was viewed, the serpent was always viewed as a symbol of the divine feminine in ancient times. It's since got seen as quite the opposite, right? As something very dark and evil, but it was originally something very good and holy and pure. But I'm talking about in a purely, let's just forget about that stuff. Let's just look at it in terms of the human body, right? Because we can debate back and forth on that stuff and that can get us nowhere. So let's just look at it in terms of the human body. And what we know about the vagus nerve is the vagus nerve winds up through the body. In fact, vagus means wanderer. It's the definition of vagus. If you look at that word, it means wandering. It's known as the wandering nerve. So it's winding up through your body, and it has a left and a right. So I'm just suggesting to you here that whoever is our creator, there is intelligent design, and this vagus nerve goes up through our body like this. And uniquely to the feminine body, it connects to this cervix in our body, okay? So this vagus pathway that goes up to our body, it goes up to our mind. And by the way, there's something called vagal tone, which means the condition of your vagus nerve. So if your vagus nerve is functioning pretty poorly and it's not connecting all this information from your body to your brain, if you have what's called low heart rate variability, which is a measurement of your vagal tone, you're dead. So if your vagus nerve is not working very well, you're deceased, right? And then there's a lot of extreme, that's the most extreme, right? And then we go all the way along a continuum. So if your vagus nerve is not working, if the whole vagus pathway is not working really well, you can have leaky gut syndrome, you can have constipation, you can have things that are going wrong in your body, things that are going wrong in your mind. You can have depression. There's all of these maladies in your mind and in your body that cannot be working so well if your vagus nerve isn't, is impaired in some way. And there's lots of things we can do to wake up the vagus nerve and bring it back to health. And one way is the stimulation, the sexual pleasure of the cervix. The cervix can actually bring higher vagal tone, change your heart rate variability, and bring all of this stuff into alignment, right? So it's kind of the more that I study this, the more that I just have a sense of awe and just I respect, if you're an atheist, if you're agnostic, if you're Eastern, if you're Western, I have worked with all of those people, everything, and I have a heart for all of it. So I have no judgment and complete open-heartedness to that. But I find it hard to believe that anyone can't just have a sense of awe about the human body after really looking at this stuff more closely. And I will go a lot faster because I didn't realize the time was running out. So bear with me just a few more minutes here and we'll get through this because I want to take your questions. So this pathway stimulates this vagal pathway through the cervix can activate this innate substance in our body called dimethyltryptamine. And the top of that staff, I'm suggesting, this is me, my little version, my interpretation about the vagus nerve. You won't read this anywhere else. I'm just suggesting that healing of the mind and body comes through sex. And this ancient symbol kind of gives us a roadmap to that. And this is my interpretation, okay? So let's just talk about this very quickly. What we know is that it's not very common, but cervical orgasms can happen during labor and delivery, okay? Not a lot of people experience cervical orgasms in labor and delivery or cervical orgasms during sexual intimacy. It's been estimated less than 30%, but I don't know who was doing that survey. I can't tell you, okay? So when we talk about people healing from psychedelics, there's two things that they talk about all the time in the psychedelic research papers, and that's set and setting. Because what we know is if you give someone a psychedelic drug and they're at a party or they're at home in their house, it's very possible to have a bad experience, you could even go into psychosis, like to have a bad experience, right? Or to have no spiritual awakening, to have nothing happen, right? And what they realize is in ancient times, or even now in certain parts of the world, there are shamans and different sacred leaders that use these psychedelics. They call them plant medicines because the substance actually comes from a real plant. They call these plant medicines. They have a set and setting. So it is the substance is used in a very intentional way. And that's what we mean about set. It's the mind is involved, like a very certain mindset. And the setting, the environment in the ritual, shamanic rituals, it's a ceremony. So when people just use these psychedelics really recreationally, randomly, they don't get freed of addiction. They don't get freed of PTSD. They don't get all of the things that people are getting in university research. Why is that? And because they're not honoring the drug, the plant medicine, in the way that it was honored in sacred circles. So what university researchers have done is they never just say, okay, here's your, medicine, and, let's see what happens. It's all very intentional. They help work on the person's mindset. What are they expecting about this? Like, what is their mindset about it? They have a very specific setting, and it's all very attuned to make sure that they address the environment it's done in and the mindset, because they know they're not going to get anything like the same results or any therapeutic results from the drug if they don't pay attention to mindset and environment. It's so crucial. It makes the difference. It's not, so it tells you it's not the drug that does it, it's the mindset and the environment that does it. So when we look at birth and we look at activating this psychedelic potential in birth, what we know is it doesn't normally happen. And why? Because the typical mindset in the world today is that birth is going to be really painful. You're going to have to get, your painkillers and everything. It's going to be really painful. And I mean, not to deny that it's not going to be painful. Pain can happen, and so can ecstasy, right? Never denying that there's not intense, pain through that process. There can't be. But when you only see it as pain, right? You don't see it as a potential of something else. And then the setting, births are typically done in a hospital setting. And we, in our mind, we know, okay, when I'm sick, I go to a hospital. So it doesn't really give you a mindset or an environment for something very powerfully spiritual to happen. So when we talk about the potential of orgasmic birth, and we look at these concepts of set and setting, one is, what we can see here is that the mindset is awareness that birth, there's a sacred nature of birth, and trust in the body's natural process. And then setting, the environment, creating circumstances that facilitate it happening, giving plenty of time, an intimate setting, warmth, candles, soft music, stroking, someone you know and love, a place where you feel safe and at home. Now, those are just some things I listed. Certainly, it's not like a formula, but just to give you a picture, this doesn't evoke a sterile hospital room with lots of machines and flashing lights. It's so when we look at how it happened in ancient cultures, we're looking at more like this, when people did have a connotation of sex being potentially an ecstatic, birth being potentially, an ecstatic experience, right? Awakening this state of orgasm. So now what I want to say is, why doesn't this type of cervical orgasm happen during sex in the world today? And in fact, in terms of women experiencing orgasm, that doesn't even happen regularly anyway. Well, I submit to you that one of the problems is how we have come to view what orgasm is. And let's just look at what the dictionary definition of what orgasm is in the world today. The dictionary definition is the rapid pleasurable release of neuromuscular tensions at the height of sexual arousal that is usually accompanied by ejaculation of semen in the male and vaginal contractions in the female. So the reason why I highlighted the word release and tensions is basically the way that orgasm is viewed in the world. I mean, you might not have really thought about this deeply, but really what it's about is build up of tension and then a release. There's nothing in there about awakening a higher state of consciousness. That's not the way it's thought about in modern culture, society today. Now, Masters and Johnson, the pioneering sex researchers that gave us a lot of information, Dr. Masters and Virginia Johnson studied thousands of women having orgasms in their laboratory. However, they focused almost exclusively on the physiological aspects of the sexual response cycle. As important as the research has been, that's like saying that life is about heartbeats, blood flow, and sweat glands. So we have a very physiological basis for understanding sex. And you can certainly have sex and have pleasure, but it's all in the lower part of your body. It doesn't really change you. I'm talking about the kind of sex where you walk away and you're permanently changed. Like, not one experience, but over time, having this type of cervical pleasure, you are not the same over time. Like, it gives you access to something else within you. And that's not what Masters and Johnson were after. Then again, how could they really understand our human potential by bringing people into a sterile medical clinic and hooking them up to machines and asking them to masturbate? Are we really going to understand the potential of human sexuality with that type of research? And it's not that they were wrong. There's only certain limitations you can do in a medical laboratory, right? It's only conducive to certain type of understanding. So what Masters and Johnson gave us is this tension release model of orgasm. So it's a tension buildup and then a release. And I put here sneeze response. But let me just go through this diagram. So one side it says arousal, the other side it says time. And basically there's a level in this model of excitement. Then the excitement builds to a certain crescendo, to a certain point, and then you reach a point where you go to orgasm, and then it goes down from there. Now, granted, this is based on male model because women can have multiple orgasms and so forth. But what I want to point out to you is that in the research, based on what Masters and Johnson gave us in terms of sex education, in the research today, it is still viewed that that orgasm is a reflex response. So basically you get to this level of tension within your body, this, not to say that there isn't the contraction of muscles and then the release. I'm not denying that. That absolutely happens. But they reduced it to its most primitive form, like its most simplistic form. And it left us with this impression that that's all sex is. It's something that happens in your genital area. It doesn't really change you much. I mean, it's just kind of, that's all it is. And it's just this reflex response. You get to a certain level of tension, and then there's this reflex. And what we know in terms of psychology, how we frame something, the model we have around something completely will dictate the experience our brain allows us to have. So we have to have a vision of something being something more for our brain to allow a different experience. That has been shown. So I'm suggesting to you, based on the research that's out there on cervical orgasms and also my own experience, that cervical orgasms needs to be seen in a different whole perspective, and that is a shift of consciousness. Okay. And what I'm suggesting here, I'm kind of go through this quickly with you, but commonly there's the idea that you bring light from the outside within in terms of elevating to a heightened state of consciousness. The cervical awakening practice is knowing that this light is within you already. And I'm not going to go into this, but when I talk about light, there is you are not just a material being, you are a spiritual being in a very scientific way. So your body is run by something called biophotons. Your cells communicate over 100,000 interactions per second simultaneously throughout your whole body. That happens at the speed of light. And it's actually something called biophotons. If you've ever seen Kirlian photography, you know. So this, you know that we emit light and we have light. Okay. The light is within us, right? So common practice is that you receive light from the teacher or guru. I'm saying that this, and this is me, this is Jenny Martin. I'm not, cervical awakening practice is what I'm saying. So if you disagree with me, fine, but I'm just sharing this with you. Cervical awakening practice, you activate the light through direct connection to the divine. So there's a lot to unpack here. I do not have time, but I'm just going to leave that there. So role of feminine and masculine, common practices, energy is transmitted from the male to the female. Cervical awakening practice, the energy is generated first within the female and awakened in the male through her body. Okay. Now listen, just as a point of clarification here, I teach women to do this on their own. So you don't need a partner, right? This slide has to do with partners, but you can also do this with another woman too. You can do this on your own. You can do this with another woman, but I just am, since there's a lot of information out there that I was asked questions on this. So these slides are actually in response to some questions. So cervical awakening practice, energy is generated first from within the female and awakened in the male through her body. And common practice is the female is the receptive to the male. And the cervical awakening practice, the female role is receptive to the divine and active in relation to the male, okay? And then the role of the body, common practice is the discipline the body to receive higher energies. You know, certain practices where you have to hold the body in a certain way to meditate for a long period of time and just sit still for, you know, if you've ever gone on a retreat where you're asked to sit in a certain position for 8 to 10 hours a day to receive, you know, an enlightened state. Well, that is one way to do things, granted, and that works for a lot of people, but that is a common practice to, and it certainly works to discipline the body to receive higher energies. I'm suggesting that the cervical awakening practice is, you're not disciplining and outside the body, you're actually merging with the body. You're completely bringing all of your awareness into the body to activate these higher energies. And let's just say common practices, not Eastern. The lower, that should not say Eastern, it should say common practices. The lower body needs to be purified because that has to do with a lot of different, it's East and West. Lower body needs to be purified. And I'm suggesting here, cervical awakening practice, the entire body is pure. And I can even prove that to you from a scientific perspective. Entire body is pure. You don't have to try to make something pure. And the sexual energy is pure. You don't have to make it spiritual. It is pure. Okay. So I'm just paying attention to the time, and I think I should just continue on here quickly. So cervical activation model of orgasm. So we have at the bottom of this model, and this is coming from me. I'm sure you've seen a lot of different interpretations, as we've already discussed, of this symbol. This is just my body-based version of it. So we have the cervix, woman's cervix at the bottom. When you really have prepared it in the way to really activate it, part of that activation is bringing the vagus nerve into a state of complete, not freeze, but relaxed state of safety and trust. So the vagus nerve is also the nerve that really connects the breath throughout the entire body, and is through the breath, we really activate the vagus nerve. The vagus nerve also innervates the heart, which is a very important part of this too. But another very important part of this is the cervix. So the cervix, the back of your neck, the word cervix means neck. So cervix is the neck of your uterus and cervix is your neck, right? And so these two cervixes are integral in this spiritual awakening. If you've ever talked to someone who does acupuncture, what they'll talk about is this little knob at the back of your neck where your spine connects to your neck, that little bony part right there, that cervix. They talk about in acupuncture that that's where your chi energy is, your life force energy. And during a cervical orgasm, you will feel a surge right up to the back of your neck. So your cervix is connecting with your cervix. I mean, I tell you, the more I study this stuff, the more I have just awe and wonder about the female body. I just do. Like there's something mystical about our bodies, right? Anyway, when you have your body in this relaxed state of all this life force energy, this is what can trip off this DMT in the pineal gland. And the reason why it has wings is you're freed from just being trapped in the 3D world, and you are able to expand your consciousness into more of an enlightened state. Not that you're permanently walking around and you can't have your feet on the ground, you do, but for the moment of orgasm, you have a glimpse into another reality. And I love this. This is one of my favorite images from my country. I'm from Ireland, and this used to be on in medieval times on churches over the opening and on castles. And these ones don't have this, but a lot of times they had breasts on them too, and their breasts were sagging. And what an Irish woman who studied this, if you Google this, you won't find this information because I don't believe a lot of the information on the internet is really showing us the feminist perspective. But I talked to a woman who really studied this in Ireland, and she talked about the reason why a lot of them had breasts that were kind of sagging is to let you know this wasn't just a fertility symbol. Yes, it can be, but it was also saying that post-menopause, this energy can be even more potent in a woman's body. And we also know that in the animal kingdom, human women are unique in the animal kingdom as desiring sex and able to have capacity for sexual pleasure after our childbearing years. So we weren't just designed to be baby making machines, which is wonderful. It's a beautiful thing to bring new life in. But our sexuality was to bring enlightenment. And the reason why she's holding open, her genital area here is because it was an over a church, is that this is a sign of spiritual awakening. Her eyes are open because she has seen a new reality. She has seen a new reality because she has experienced that through her sexuality. So if you Google that, you are not going to find that definition. You're going to find pretty dark definitions, or, that she's a symbol of lust or evil. I don't follow that at all. I mean, I'm not trying to convince you of my reality, but anyway. So in conclusion, awakening to the power and pleasure of your cervix can have a profound effect on your overall mental and emotional well-being, and anyone with a cervix can experience this. This includes those who once had a cervix. Even if it was removed, it still can happen.
Thank you, Jenny. I'm actually glad that you took all the time that you needed and you go off on you're so smart. It's just so full, and I love when you get inspired and passionate about what you do. And because I really do think, like you said at the beginning, this information is not only potentially transformative personally, but also, collectively, the more people we have that are remembering. And I love what you said, to activate the memory that exists within our bodies. Like it is already there, and it's just remembering and learning how to activate it.
Yes.
And that we all have the potential to experience this. So we are a little over time, but I just want to go a little bit more because because it's still exciting. So can you just quickly tell me how you got into teaching this? Like, what has your journey been?
Oh, yeah, sure. So my journey was just very briefly is growing up in a home in Ireland, in Dublin, where sex was not approved of, where actually I could care less about sex. I actually never even wanted to be married. I was quite happy to have no sexual desire. It just was a negative thing to me. Plus, to be truthful, I had unwanted sexual experiences. I didn't actually have conscious memory. It was only after I met someone who I met actually long distance, and that seemed less threatening to have a phone relationship with him 6 months before I met him in person. But when I did meet him in person and when I was first intimate, that's when all of the memories started flooding my mind. And that's when I realized, okay, I actually do want a real consensual, intimate connection with this person, who ended up being my life partner. So I need to find a new way to figure out my sexuality. And I didn't heal from all my trauma by going through years of therapy. I did go to a couple sessions, but I realized at the same time, someone had given me a book on Mary Magdalene, to tell you the truth. And it opened up a doorway for me in my own Judeo-Christian tradition that, oh my God, there was a different view of sex once. Oh my God. And I found myself wanting to replenish my soul and my spirit's memory. And that replenishment, that new framework, started to allow me to have a different visceral experience. And I also had a very patient partner who we worked through a lot of the practices that I teach women now. You can't just go 0 to 100. You know, your body has been traumatized. You have to be very careful and patient with your body, right? You have to, your mind might be ready to race and to go, but your body is not. So you have to be very patient with your body and kind of let your body settle into a different state of being where it's not on vigilance and threat. But yeah, once I had my own first real feeling of power on my cervix, I have never felt that kind of power. It's hard to describe, but I felt like I could walk out to the street and pick up a car. Like I felt so like there was something coming through me that was not like me. And it definitely wasn't this kid from the past that was me, little Jenny, who was frightened of everyone, right? There was like a fierceness, but not an aggressive way, in a very loving way that was almost like my ancestors, like the ancient women coming through me. And I realized that presence is existing in our bodies still. But if someone doesn't share that with you and you don't know it and you just see what's on porn, or you just even don't know, like you have no clue and you don't wake it up. But it healed me. And I have a whole thing on my website about my story about how it healed me. But it's just, how could I not share this with women? Like I used to actually work in rape prevention, and the people that work in that work, God bless them, they're doing wonderful work. But I realized we'll never get to a society, as a society, we'll never get further if we just help the people that have been, the survivors. We need to give people, especially young people, a new vision of what sex could be. And we need to have women walking around that are fully embodied that, so other women can see that and see that, okay, there is another way of being,
Yeah.
So
Absolutely. Beautiful. So we have a little question here, and I'm just curious. So you teach a course on this, and there's many different ways to learn about this through you. And somebody's just asking, how can women work with you individually? So can you tell us a little bit more about your system and the course you offer? And
sure. Yeah.
and I just, yeah, while I'm still here, I just want to say, I mean, we've offered, we've had you on our webinar before, and we've gotten really, really positive feedback from folks who have gone through the course with you, that you've taught, that have worked with you, and it's just really inspiring to me, which is why I wanted to bring you on again. And I'm really hoping that our viewers can, maybe go deeper with you in some way.
Yeah. Thank you. Okay. So let me just get to the proper slide here. Yeah. So there we go. So I do teach a cervical awakening system. The course is called the Psychedelic Cervix. Okay. Not that you're going to take any drugs, it's all within you, okay? But the system I use is called Cervical Awakening System that I've developed over the years, and it's inspired by my experience that has taken me a long time, and that it's sourced in science. I give people scientific papers so they know that it's actually sourced in science. And it's not that I'm a Tantra teacher, it's not that I'm any particular thing. I've had people that we can all learn from each other. I welcome anyone from any background, or if you have no affiliation with any particular dogma or religion or creed, it's agnostic to any of that. Anyway, here's the system. So basically, to go through this, there's like 8 processes to it. So it's kind of spanning over 8 weeks. And we start at the bottom, and that is psychological safety. And that's basically if your vagus nerve, if your parasympathetic nervous system isn't resonating at a certain psychological safety, it's not going to let you get to these states. So that is, even if you've never had trauma, psychological safety is necessary for everyone. And you need to be able to access that on your own. All of these things I'm teaching, it's a solo course. So you do it with yourself, even if you have a partner, so that you can then be able to do it with a partner. Perception, what we're talking about there is that what is the cultural baggage, how women are portrayed in the world, and what is the religious baggage that you're bringing to our work together. So we acknowledge that. We don't judge any of it. We just, what is the past, view of your body and your sexuality as a woman, cultural, religious. So we look at that. Then we look at your personal history. What heartaches have you had from past relationships or not having a past relationship? What baggage is weighing you down from past betrayals or whatever? So we will look at that, because all of that needs to be addressed before we awaken the cervix. The cervix isn't like, oh, we just need to stimulate it and it's all going to happen. No, this is the most powerful sex organ in your body, your brain. And, when we talked about you can give someone a psychedelic, but the psychedelic isn't going to do anything if you don't have the set and setting. So if you don't have your head, in the game, the whole thing's not going to work. So partner, what we mean there is, yes, later on when you're with your partner, it's really important that you feel desired by your partner. You feel an emotional connection with your partner. There's some kind of love and care there. But when I'm teaching it, partner means you're your partner. How self-compassionate and loving are you being to yourself? Now that sounds like, oh, well, that's pretty basic. Well, no, it's not. You know what gives the contractions when you're birthing a baby? It's oxytocin, right? Oxytocin is also the trust and love hormone, right? So when you, scientifically speaking, when you generate real feelings of love and care for yourself or for another person, there's more oxytocin running through your body. Then oxytocin will also give you the contractions in terms of cervical orgasms. So it plays a role in birth and in sexual pleasure. And so your relationship, your connection, loving connection with yourself is so important. Purpose, what we talk about there is, how we talked about set and setting. And when the shaman is working with the plant medicine, they have a certain sacred intention to use it for sacred means. Purpose becomes really important when you're activating the cervix, because it's the intention you're bringing. What is the intention that you have here? And I'm suggesting, in terms of our work together, there's the intention to access the body's wisdom and to access the sacred, access something greater than the material self, right? And presence, this is where we talk about and we give practice. And all of these, there's, excuse me, homework and practices for you to do in between weeks. You learn something, you have practices. So it's not just all discussion, but there's stuff for you to ground in your body, experience, and then come back to the next class and debrief and talk about it, right? So when we get to the week where we talk about presence, you get homework to do with that. And that's about, we live so much of our world here stuck in our head. Nobody's fault. We have all these devices, iPhones and everything, that are constantly looking for our constantly distracting us. to awaken the cervix, we have to be able to practice dropping out of the head, being fully in the body. But it's not just mindfulness. If you don't have all of these other things that come before it, it won't work. So we really, it is a mindfulness, but it's mindfulness stacked on top of all these other things. And then passion and pleasure. Okay, so that's sexual desire. And for women, you don't have to have sexual desire before you begin this practice, or even with a partner. The desire to be sexual can show up in response to the things that you're doing here. So, but we do talk about the topic of sexual desire and how passion really drives this, and what is, how sexual desire shows up for you. And then pleasure. To be able to really fully receive the potential of the cervix really relates to how good we are at being able to hold pleasure in our body. And that even goes outside of sex. So if you get a promotion at work or someone gives you a compliment, can you hold that good feeling in your body without disconnecting, right? Can we hold pleasure in our body? Because cervical activation is like a masterclass in being able to vibrate with joy and goodness. And most of the time we deflect. Oh, someone gives us a compliment. Oh, we compliment them back because it feels uncomfortable to be in the spotlight. But no, your cervix is calling you to a greater expression of you where you radiate light, So, and then potential, because my system is not just about, I love the idea of women living in, more sexual pleasure and all of that, but it's about awakening a greater sense of who you are, your true self, which is non-material. And when I'm talking about pleasure here, when you do all of these things, that have to do with, and it's not about doing, it's about being, right? When you're embodying all of these things, the potential is you wake up a greater awareness of who you are as not just a material being. And we can't make that happen like we, make other things happen in our life in a very linear way. This is not linear. This is opening to this possibility that is always within us, but we live in a pretty, chaotic world where has disconnected us from this innate wisdom. So I have, do you want me to show you a couple of testimonials before I finish here? Oh, I can't hear you, Onel.
Sorry. Yeah, I would love to see some testimonials.
Okay.
The folks who contacted me who've taken your course are so positive. So I think
These
it'd be good to
cars
see.
help me to understand myself from inside much better than I used to feel before. I can fly to the different dimension. I can be in my body and somewhere else, and I don't need anybody else for that. This is for me main achievement, because I never can be in sex and not in my head. I can have sex, but I never was in the different dimension or somewhere else or with my body. It was always something behind my back. I always feel like I have to perform something that's like to please someone. And recently, when I started working with Jenny, I started feeling totally different connection. That's like I can have orgasm even without penetration. And it's like being with myself and being somewhere beautiful and loving my body even more, just with a touch or with them thinking about. And what I realized that when I start to have this sexual arousal, that I can play with the energy inside of me, that I don't need the energy taken from the universe. As you teach us, I can play with this energy up and down inside of my body. This is absolutely new thing for me, and I'm still practicing, learning. So I know the goal is not achieved yet. It's like it will be even more effects. I'm sure it is. And my biggest, strongest vaginal orgasm was during the one of this practice.
So I took Jenny Martin's course in Cervical Awakening. And the big thing for me was that I came to trust much more in my own intuition and my own strength of conviction to follow my beliefs. And for me, that feels like that could be a transformational thing. I didn't expect it to be around some of this stuff. I expected it to be much more around like cervical orgasms. So for me, it's like, but there was that, I mean, there was that sense that that process leads into bigger things or other healing and stuff, wasn't there? So I didn't really expect it to come to this point, if that makes sense.
I love it. I love that you've worked with folks all over the world, and that this information really translates, and that we're hungry for it globally, for sure. So so you sent me a link and I'm going to post it in the chat. Can you talk a little bit about how folks would sign up for your course or to work with you, or if they want more information?
Sure. So the way that I work with the course, because it is individualized, I don't have anything canned online on my website where you just go and take a course on your own and study solo. It's all very personal, it's live, and I want to make sure that the people that are in my course are actually, it's the right fit for them. And I also want to answer any questions that maybe we didn't have time for today, but also questions that are individual to you. So what I need for anyone who is even remotely interested in taking the class is to book a 20-minute time. I have openings in the next, I think, 5 or 7 days to book a 20-minute session with me. So that will give you a chance to get all the details about the course. It's coming up in a few weeks, but there's various ways that it's offered, but it is all live and very personalized. So I do want to have some kind of rapport and knowledge before we start working together. And, for some people, after we do the 20-minute session, we realize it's just not the right timing for them. It's just not right for them. I don't want to bring anyone into the course if it would, some people need something different on their journey. And if I'm not the right part of that fit, I will tell you right away. So.
Yeah, great. Okay, so I've dropped that link in there. It's a Calendly link. Go for it, click on it, get your session with Jenny, your 20 minutes. And I just want to say, I really love that you're not offering this canned pre-recorded thing. It's like, it is live, it's personal. You take people through their own journeys. And I think that interpersonal connection is really, really important.
Yeah, me too.
Nowadays, for sure.
Oh, the screen is freezing.
I just want to ask a couple of questions these are what folks have put in the Q&A. Oh, you're frozen? Can you hear me?
Oh, no, I can see you now. Sorry. Yeah.
Sorry, that's strange. Sorry. I just want to ask a couple of questions, maybe like 5 minutes of questions, and then we'll end. I know we've gone over, and I appreciate.
Yeah, I apologize, guys. I'm so sorry.
Oh, darn, you talked on and on about something we're all interested in. It's totally fine and good. Okay, so one question is, how do we merge the physical cervical orgasm with the spiritual for ourselves and also involve our partner in this elevated experience?
Oh, that is a wonderful question. And it's not something that I can answer within, a couple of minutes or even in a 20-minute call. I want to prepare you for that, because it's almost like saying, how can I, I'm not, but it's almost like saying, how can I get an elevated state of consciousness through meditation? There's a lot to unpack there, right? But basically you're saying, how can I merge the physical with the spiritual? Well, it is a practice, right? So it is preparing the body in very specific ways, and then preparing the mind. So when I talk about set and setting, it's having the right mindset about it, but also you have to do things to actually prepare your nervous system too. But the basic thing to know about, it's not an intellectual process. It's not like you have to like analyze this and figure it out. All you have to do is facilitate it. But there are certain things, and that's what I've spent the last 20 years putting together this curriculum for people to address exactly what your question is, right? So there's ways to, instead of you having to go out and like trial and error and figure this out, I've kind of done that work for you and put this together in a course, and I will be your personal guide to work you through this process with you, so that you can get the benefit of all the years I've worked with this myself and with other people, and also evidence-based practices. So that your question actually addresses the whole purpose of the course. I mean, that question can be unpacked over 8 weeks, really. I mean, it is.
Yeah.
It's a very deep question.
Yeah, great. And again, I put the link in the chat, the Calendly link for folks to sign up. So whoever, it says anonymous person asked that, whoever that anonymous person was, feel free to.
Yes, please feel free. If you think, if there's anything that is kind of, we don't have a chance to talk about it here, just grab a 20-minute time. I'm totally fine if you're not even interested in the course. Grab a time on Calendly to talk with me. I don't normally have just open 20-minute slots. This is like the only week that I'm going to have this.
Yeah.
And this is your opportunity to actually get your questions answered about the course.
Yeah, great.
Yeah.
Here's another question. Do you know of any instances of women reversing HPV or cervical dysplasia naturally or through cervical pleasure practices?
I love that question. So there's no literature on it. There's not a scientific paper I can point you to. I can only talk about, working with some women and hearing about them later saying that they don't have the diagnosis. My own personal experience, I had that diagnosis. I didn't go through any of the invasive procedures, corrective procedures, because they weren't popular back when I actually was told I had HPV, but then it disappeared. It was no longer something that showed up. Intuitively, my intuitive sense is there is a link between experiencing the pleasure of the cervix and that disease the disease state not being there. And even though I don't have research specifically pointing this, what I do have is some research on cancer. And it talks about the lack of sexual, I swear to God, I have a paper that I can send to you, or if you book a 20-minute appointment, then I'll find out who you are and I can give it to you. But I have a paper from some researchers in Italy that talk about the lack of sexual pleasure suppressing the immune system and being correlated with cancer, and sexual pleasure increasing the capacity of the immune system and the prevention of cancer. That I have a whole paper on that.
Whoa, that's interesting. Great, thank you. So let's see, one more thing here. You did touch on this a little bit, but maybe it would be good to just clarify again. How many kinds of internal orgasms are there? I'm familiar with external clitoral, internal G-spot, vaginal wall. I also have lots of other internal orgasms, but how can I tell if it's a cervical orgasm I'm having?
So, there's parts of your body. People can have ear orgasms, breast orgasms. There's like, your body can be mapped with zones of erotic pleasure all over. And I wouldn't get caught up in, was it cervical? It's the way that I like to look at it is, what are the after effects? Do I feel like I'm accessing more of my true self? Do I feel like I'm walking in a different state of inner peace? It's how are you transformed on an ongoing basis in your daily life, right? So when we, for instance, let's look at this in terms of, if you were doing meditation, you're like, did I get to the meditative state? Did I do it right? Did I get there? Well, the only way you know is the proof is in the pudding. Are you, when somebody crashes into your car on the freeway, do you, oh my God, or are you kind of got a new sense of peace because you've been meditating? Well, the same thing with the cervical awakening. When life, throws you a curveball, and normally you'd be like, holy crap, I think I'm going to have a meltdown. But there's something else existing inside you now. There's a new presence and power existing. That's how you know you've been having cervical orgasms.
Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. I love it. So I am looking at the time, and
Yes.
we are going to wrap up now. It's been longer than I anticipated. And I just want to say, one of the things that you were talking about in your course and what kind of why you do this work, and just these words were super inspiring to me. The concept of holding pleasure and radiating light in our body, and like the greater potential that we all have individually, through this practice, through the offerings that you have. It just was really hopeful to me, and I think really resonates with why I started the Beautiful Cervix Project, and just my hope in general for this world right now. So again, everyone, thank you so much for being here. Grab that Calendly link, get it, sign up with Jenny for a little Q&A if you have other questions or more personal questions that you didn't get to ask because you didn't want everyone to hear them out loud. Definitely check in with her. She has lots of different ways that she offers this information, courses or personally, and please reach out to her. Just so you know, there will be a follow-up email coming about this that will also include a replay.
Should I?
Yeah. And so it's going to be coming from Dr. Jenny's email, not me, Beautiful Cervix. So she's going to put her email right now in the chat. And so what you can do in your email is like highlight that email right now and put it into your make her a contact in your email so that it doesn't go into your spam folder. And also, if you have any other questions or whatever, you can reach out to her on that, but the Calendly link is best for that. Yay, I'm so glad we just got the comment. Thank you. This has been one of the best webinars I've attended in a while. And so thank you so much, everyone, for coming. And Dr. Jenny, I love your passion for this, and I really do think it's revolutionary. And I hope that some of you will take this, and some of you will go more in depth with Jenny and what she has to offer, because we need it. So thank you, Dr. Jenny. Anything else you want to say?
No, it's been wonderful. Thank you all thank you for taking the extra time with me. It's been wonderful. Thank you, Onel, for being such a visionary with all this. Appreciate it.
You're welcome. Goodbye, everyone. Thanks so much. Have a wonderful, pleasurable day.
Bye.